I bet this would look better with a tie. Hello everybody, so I will admit something now. It was pretty silly of me to make an entire video on gender and gender roles and biological sex without actually ever mentioning, I believe, the word masculinity or masculine. So with that said, here's a clarification. As you can see, I have my different categories here, 3 different terms. I'm using masculine, male, manly terms in order to illustrate my my point, because it will allow me to talk in first person. But I do concede it's possible that my experience in this regard may be different from if I were a woman talking about female, woman, and feminine. I'd imagine that could be the case. So I'm just going to talk about my experience. The first thing I do want to point out, because it's maybe something that I've been guilty of, is that when you look at these 3 terms, it does make it apparent how trying to point to apparent inconsistencies in how somebody uses these terms might be a fraught exercise, simply because what these terms... Oh, by the way, I should clarify, this is not a very impressive PowerPoint. This is the extent of the PowerPoint. I'm just using it because I used a PowerPoint last time, so I figured I should use a PowerPoint for this clarification. People might use these terms in some way that's, inconsistent. I'm just going to give one example, which is that manly means masculine. Like if you say somebody is manly, that means masculine. Pretty simple point, but I do think it's worth stressing that the idea that there is a absolute clear delineation between any of these terms is not the case. Now, with that said, I do just want to make a clarification, which is some people have, I think, got the impression from my last video that what I was saying, and I admit that I could have been clearer about this, was that the categories of man and woman exist to describe something very similar to the categories of masculine and feminine. And I kind of understand why this was the case. The category of man, I said it was sociological, psychological, and phenomenological. And obviously, I think in particular the sociological aspect there maybe made a lot of people think, well, hold on a minute. I need to plug in my laptop. Hold on a minute. You're describing like kind of social norms then. You're describing societal expectations. And you're saying that whether or not you're a man relates to the opinions of society. And therefore, if you are, let's say, not masculine, if you're somebody who does not identify with societal norms about masculinity, or does not meet a certain standard of societal norms of masculinity, that this would suggest you are not a man. I don't think that. That's not my belief, and I did just want to clarify that. But then there's a more substantial point, which is people are saying, well, hold on a minute. What is the relationship exactly between these 3 terms? And obviously I did spend a lot of time clarifying the distinction between man and male. And I think what probably that led to, because I didn't mention masculinity at all, was a lot of people were saying or thinking, oh, he spent a lot of time clarifying the difference between male and man. So is he saying then that actually the similarity or the term that man actually means is more like masculine? And I want to basically say, no, that's not the case. So really simply put, I believe that the category of man is a conduit between male and masculine. And that's actually the simplest way I could explain it. Literally everything else I say is just going to be an increasingly kind of elaborate explanation of that. So I'll just give you the point 1. For me, the category of male is completely removed from any sort of sociological consideration. If I say somebody's a male, intrinsically in that, I am assuming no degree of that having any kind of relevance beyond the pure biological and material. So I'm saying somebody's a male in the same way that I might say that a given animal is a male. In the same way that I might, talk about whether or not an ant is a male or something, like it's a term in itself which in some sense has, the idea of being a male, a very kind of distinct definition relating, of course, to gamete production, a very specific definition, but also at the same time one of those definitions that is so specific that it's actually quite broad, because it's very specific, it's about gamete production, but the reality is that the manifestation in a physical sense of that gamete production can be hugely varied. And obviously this is one of the issues with people trying to cast doubt on the idea of maleness and femaleness when it comes to humans. They'll say, well, clownfish, what are they called? Horsefish? Are they called horsefish? Seahorses, that's it. Seahorses. And there's penis fencing slugs. I do remember that. And obviously the thing you point out is, well, yes, talking in a complete abstract of the entire animal kingdom, yes, the ideas of male and female are incredibly varied, but within human beings, there is still some variation, but it doesn't make sense to contextualize human biological sex within the wider animal kingdom, because guess what? Human beings are a specific species within the animal kingdom. But the point I'm getting at is that for me, saying somebody is a male or a female, and for a very obvious reason, I remember when kind of the neckbeard thing was a bigger thing than it is now. And one of the things that was joked about is how a lot of the time neckbeards will call women females. And one of the reasons people find that kind of strange is because it's a very sort of cold, scientific way to refer to somebody. And, for me, obviously I'm not talking about it from the perspective of how it might make you feel to hear a man saying that, in a kind of with regards to social awkwardness. But I do think it's true that if I hear the categories of male and female, I am assuming a certain degree of removedness from any consideration to how the constructs of man and woman have evolved sociologically and developed sociologically and come to be conceived of as a distinct thing in their own rights. That when you say male or female, you're saying very simply the biological matter that makes somebody up. And that's what you're speaking with reference to. And the idea that there may be a class of people related to biological sex, or that there may be particular groups that face particular sociological experiences and, form activist groups and things like that, all the kind of sociological considerations of being, let's say, an adult human female are removed. And, I think with that term, adult human female, you're describing kind of three very, let's say, cold, scientific, objective things. You are saying somebody is an adult. What does that mean? Oh, well, it means, kind of post-pubescent, I guess. You're saying somebody is a human. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that, that they're on in the big tree of life, their genetics are a certain way that they're, not a different species. And they're a female. What does that mean? It's talking about, their gonads and their chromosomes and, how their bodies are centered around particular gamete production. So very, very kind of, like I say, the best term I can use to describe it is kind of emotionally cold, distant, objective, but, not really looking towards the fact that, hey, guess what? Adult human female, it isn't just this category in scientific terms. It is a term for a collective group of people for whom there is a massive sociological and historical story there to how they came to be what they're regarded as. And I make the comparison to race quite a lot, but I do think it's a valid comparison most of the time. And I think, pointing out association with race, I feel like my fan is super loud. Pointing out people's attitudes towards race is a good way to show inconsistencies when it comes to their attitudes towards gender. Because I do think they are similar concepts in that they're these social constructs from which all sorts of ideas about, stereotypes and bigotries and inequalities in society have emerged. And significantly, I would say that, as I said before, there are all sorts of different material, kind of scientific ways of categorizing race. You can talk about race in terms of just the pure physical characteristics. You can talk about race in terms of just the kind of genetic way in which people of different ethnicities will be more genetically related to each other than they are to other people. And of course, you can talk about race in terms of the actual the actual physical distance covered by a particular individual and a particular individual's family. With regards to, did they come from Africa? How recently did they come from Africa? Did they spend thousands of years in Europe after their ancestors left Africa or not? These are ways to understand what somebody's race is. But of course, all of these are ignoring the fact that what it actually means to be black is a much bigger thing than any of these just pure reality, scientific classifications. And indeed, a lot of people will get quite uncomfortable when being a particular race is termed in purely scientific language. Obviously, unless it's social science. So I think that's a good analogy for me about why, am I a male? Yes, I'm a male. What does that refer to? It refers to a series of physical characteristics of this fleshy shell that I have, this biological makeup, this organic matter. But it's removing the fact that there is actually a sociological dimension to who I am. I'm not just my biology. So now let's kind of go over to the opposite end of the spectrum, as it were, and masculinity. So what is masculinity? Well, it's kind of falls under what we call, and it has different terms, like people say gender expression, like do you conform to certain standards for the genders? Do you conform to the standard placed upon men? And what is that standard? Well, it's based on absolute nonsense, really, isn't it? It's, if you're a man, you're supposed to be strong and not express your emotions. It's even things like, just a weird analogy or a weird example, I guess, maybe, but it's even things like if you're a man, you're supposed to love kind of working out your upper body and not really like the idea of working out your lower body. I think that's kind of a man thing. It's like, oh yeah, you're a man, you skip leg day. You're always pumping those guns, but you're not pumping those buns. But it's obvious things. Like you kind of don't need me to. It would almost I'd be treating you like an idiot if I went through, here are the stereotypes associated with masculinity. But one obvious thing about masculinity is that it is something which has evolved dramatically over time. And of course, never mind evolving, is completely different across different cultures. A lot of the time you read kind of old antiquated, antiquated as in from antiquity, books, and it talks about men just crying all the time. Like there's just so many men just crying. It'll be like, and blah-de-blah heard this thing and he wept. And it's like, wow. For most men in the West, crying is a rare thing. It's something which, most men aren't comfortable doing, myself included. Short of watching the baby minds scene from Dumbo, it's really difficult for me to just have a proper good sob. And obviously it's incredibly easy to just go through and point out how these stereotypical ideas of masculinity and femininity, not only are they harmful both to the psychological well-being and the social equality of, to an extent, men and women. Obviously, in the case of women, it's both. It's the social inequality aspect of it and the psychological well-being aspect of it. In the case of men, it is much more the psychological well-being aspect of it. Obviously, masculinity doesn't really lead to social inequality for men, but it certainly does harm a lot of men psychologically. In the case of women, like I say, it's both, and I don't think anybody who's being reasonable should ever be claiming that the categories of masculinity and femininity don't more negatively affect women. On top of it being harmful, it's also just complete bogus. And like I say, you don't really need to just go through, like I don't need to go through the examples here. It's so obvious. We know the examples. Almost every single example of, oh well, manly men who are real men, they don't do that. You can see not only is it something which varies across cultures, not only is it something which has a historical precedent for being different, but it's also something which, as our society is becoming kind of more feminist, we see these things changing. To argue that these things are based in evolutionary psychology or things like that. Well, if you believe that, then at least if you believe it firmly, I'm not 100% against this idea that evolutionary psychology could have some minor differences that would cause slight variations in the behavior of men and women. I'm not 100% against that. I would need strong evidence for it, but I'm not 100% against it in principle. But regarding the claim that evolutionary psychology explains the broader trends of, and the wider extent of differences between men and women, I don't believe that at all, because I think you're seeing that be something that changes even just as society has kind of evolved and developed over the last century. From, one where women couldn't vote, one where women are in positions of power. People have gone from thinking, oh, women are not emotionally kind of equipped to decide who to vote for, to now, people thinking that obviously it's perfectly acceptable for a woman to be the head of state or head of government of an entire country. So in some sense, what I would say is, if you've got these two categories, one which is based in kind of cold, harsh material reality to the extent that it really pays no regard to the kind of sociological, experiential aspect of, let's say having a male body, compared to, and then on the other hand, you've got something which is absolutely not based in reality at all. It's completely made up. It's completely fictitious. It's complete nonsense, this idea of masculinity. Well, actually, it makes sense to me to have a category in the middle. And that category for me is man. Like, you kind of, if you want to know what my understanding of me being a man is, well, I would say it's not quite as cold and harsh and just with no regard for the actual kind of experience of my existence, my lived experience as calling myself a male. But it's not as, fictitious and nonsensical as this idea of masculinity. It is that I'm a man. It is something which I do experience, and it is something which is related to my being a male, and heavily related to my being a male. Yes, the fact that I am a man relates to the fact I have, for example, a penis. But, and this is the key thing, I'd say it relates to, in a more meaningful sense, the experience of knowing you have a penis. And I suppose I should say this. I am not adverse to the claim that there is such a thing as to feel like a man or feel like a woman. Not in principle. The issue I have with gender identity extremism is not with this idea that one can know innately that they are a man or a woman. I actually don't disagree with that. My issue would be that I don't think you can ground your claim to be a man or a woman in your claim to innate knowledge of that fact. Because you can innately know things that are wrong. And that's kind of my belief. Like, I think that to be a man is the experience of knowing that you have a male body, knowing that you live as, this, but significantly knowing that because it's true. There's an idea that knowledge is kind of this philosophical idea. Knowledge has a definition as a justified true belief. Now, I believe that somebody can believe they are a man or believe they're a woman. I think that's what gender dysphoria is. You can believe you're a man when you have female biology. You can believe you're a woman when you have male biology. I believe it's a belief. And I also believe, and this is the key thing, I believe you can claim to know it. But I would say it's not authentic knowledge in that it's not justified and it's not true. If it's justified, what's the justification for it? There is no justification. And then, of course, is it true? Well, that relates heavily to what the justification is for it. Whereas, by contrast, I would say, I know I'm a man because, one, I believe it, but two, it's justified. And why is it justified? Because of my male biology. That's kind of my belief. I do believe there is this innate idea of knowing you're a man. What I don't believe is that this innate idea comes from some kind of spiritual man essence. I believe instead it comes from the experience of your biology. Knowing you have a male body, knowing you have a female body. And for somebody to say they're a man when they don't have a male body, to me, I would say that's mistaken. And I would say that's gender dysphoria. And I would say it's something which, we can't pretend doesn't exist, but it's something which I don't see any reason to say, okay, in that case, you're actually authentically a man. Because I'd say, well, what does a man mean? What does it mean to say you're a man? Well, I think it means you have male biology. So, if you claim to know that you should be a man when you don't have male biology, it sounds to me like you think you should be a man, and that's not really true. So that's kind of, I guess, trying to explain my belief of the relationship between being a man and being a male. For me, I guess as weird as it is, being a man is just, it's quite an open-ended term, and this is something that I'll cover in the kind of the second part. It's quite an open-ended kind of concept that relates to being a male, but covers all the things that being a male doesn't. You're a male, okay, fine, that's just explaining the, like I say, just material reality of the situation. But to actually experience that, to internalize that as a knowledge about yourself, and also to relate to that as a social categorization, to understand that you belong to a group of individuals based upon that, is to say you're a man. And again, I would relate it heavily to race in that context, that you can say that you are a black person based not just on the material reality that I kind of already explained, but also based on your knowledge that you belong to that group. And I think the alternative would be something like eye color. I have, I guess, kind of green hazel eyes. Tell me what color my eyes are in the comments below. But the key thing is that I don't then have a category of, that I put myself into based on that. And if there was a category, if there was an idea that, a similar relationship between having green eyes and having a penis, say, where not just, or, having male biology, where it's not just a physical feature, but something which actually, from which is, emerges all of these other social categories, or, at least one other social category, then yeah, I'd probably say that I have my green eyes, but independent of that, I also belong to the category of green-eyed people. And that's kind of how I feel about, saying I'm a man. To say I'm a male is just to say, this is my biology, this is my organic matter, this is the material flesh that I have. But to say I'm a man is to say I belong to this category of similar people who live in a society where this is a social construct, where this idea exists. And I have a legacy of being connected to all of these other men throughout history who have also, related to, and kind of existed at this nexus point between their biological reality and the social, society, the culture that they live in. And those two things come together and man. Now, what I've done again is explained the difference between being a male and being a man. And maybe now some people are thinking, well, hold a minute now I'm back to square one, because it sounds like you're saying that being a man is masculinity. No. The end. No, not really. So I kind of want to explain, and I should say this, I believe that the category of man is much closer to the category of male than it is to the category of masculinity. Like, a lot closer. I believe that the categories of man and male can almost be used interchangeably. I'm quite happy to see them used interchangeably. If somebody says, we need to fight for female rights against the persecution by males, I wouldn't say, actually, you're talking about sociological categories there, so really it's women's rights against men. I wouldn't do that, because I'd be like, you know what, they're very similar terms. And I would say it's the subtlest, almost, to be honest, like almost a kind of poetic nuance of like, it's not really about necessarily the nitty-gritty meaning, it's more about the feel of the words, that, male and man, they're describing different things because they have a different feeling, a different association, which is really all language is. But, so they're very close. So actually, distinguishing it from masculinity is pretty easy. Masculinity is a series of things that men do. It's a series of things that men are supposed to do, rather. It's a series of expectations placed upon men. It is an entirely separate thing from the category of men, because it's a series of things that are premised upon the idea of men. And this is really the kind of way I want to make this distinction very clear. For me, and I said this in a comment, but I'll just repeat it here. The idea of being a man is a conduit between biological sex and masculinity, between male and masculine. And the reason I say that is because, to go kind of back to the beginning, male is purely biological. We've already covered that. It's purely just in material reality, cold, objective material reality. Masculinity, totally the opposite. Completely in the mind, completely made up, invented by people. Who had all these weird ideas about, traditional gender roles and things like that, completely invented. Now, here's the question. How do you get from something which is so clearly based in just material, scientific, objective reality to something based in complete woo-woo hogwash nonsense, masculinity? How do you get from one to the other? Well, I would argue you can't really get directly from one to the other. It's very difficult, because you're talking about something which is very obviously just based in material reality, that's just obviously true, to something which is just stupid and wrong and not sensical at all. And I think it makes sense, historically, I think it's true to say that societies may have come up with kind of mythical understandings of biological sex, and it was, and because they had those mythical understandings of biological sex, they were able to kind of relate it to a mythical reality. And that then allowed them to build up this idea of these kind of gender stereotypes. I think, and I feel, that as society has developed, those kind of ideas, they don't necessarily make much sense. And they're hard for kind of reasonable people to not see immediately through. But what has instead emerged is that, you now have this category of man, and man is kind of the bait and switch foundation upon which masculinity is based. So it's, you can't, if you just start with the pure biological, you can't really end up with, and that's why only these people should vote because they have penises. That's just, it's stupid and it's not going to convince anybody. But if you actually say, okay, actually these people with penises, they are men. And what is man? It is a distinct category. And therefore, what we can then do is invent whatever kind of conception of being a man we like. So we take, because essentially really what I'm talking about here is the removal of the category of man from biological reality and taking it towards like, oh, actually now we've got this distinct idea, let's pick it up and run with it and bring it towards masculinity. That to me is what man is. It is the foundation upon which other ideas about masculinity, other ideas about social expectations and things like that is built, because you don't build them directly on cold hard material reality. You build it upon these social constructs, that essentially social constructs serve as conduits. I guess that's the only term I can think of. And I think it's again a similar thing with race. If you just say, oh yeah, people from Africa are stupid and naturally inferior, that doesn't make much sense. Like what about them being from Africa makes them stupid and naturally inferior? That's a very silly thing to say. But if you say, oh, actually, we've put all these people together and then we've categorized them into these groups, and these groups are races. And then suddenly you can then start in your media, in your stories, start saying, oh, and this race is the scary race, or this race is the lazy race, or this race is the intelligent superior race. You invent these categories, and then you build up on top of those categories once you've invented them. And I think it's a similar thing with man. You say, okay, there's males, females, but actually, the males are also, they're men, and the females are women. And now you've invented these kind of new categories, and you build things on top of those categories. That's what I believe is the relationship between masculinity and man. Like I say, it is the conduit. It's the way that you get from biological reality to sociological categorization to social norms. Biological reality, sociological categorization, social norms. And I don't really think you can go straight from one to the other. I think you can just go biological reality, social norms, because I think these two things are too distinct. But by having man there, it helps. Now, I feel like at this point, lots of people might think, well, hold on a minute. It sounds like you're saying that the category of man itself should be gotten rid of. And actually, you're saying we should just use the terms male and female, because you're saying that this destructive, terrible idea of masculinity is premised upon and built upon the category of being a man. And the answer is no, I don't think that. In short, I think that the category of man is inherently a very honest category, and it's honest about the fact that we are not just purely material reality people. We are not just people who just look at reality and just kind of process it like computers or something. We are creatures who invent categories and invent constructs in order to identify things and group things and understand things. And for us, I think, we know that actually there is a difference between this purely biological category of male and female and the sociological reality of these two different groups of men and women. And I think inherently we need to keep the categories of men and women because we do understand at our core that those categories exist because they reflect reality. And actually, I think what the goal of feminism should be, and I will admit that I don't think feminism should really relate to male and man and masculine from kind of the perspective of, from the perspective of how I'm going to say it, and this is an example of where it would be more appropriate if I was talking about female and woman and feminine, but I'll keep it with male and man and masculine. The goal of feminism, in my mind, and the goal of kind of anti-sexism in general, should be to say, well, yes, this category of man exists to explain and kind of conceptualize the biological reality of being male within a society of groups and constructs. However, all this other stuff that is being invented, masculinity, all that nonsense, has no place. It shouldn't exist. And fundamentally, we should get rid of it. We should understand that man just exists to explain the distinct experience of being biologically male and the reality of that experience. And that we should not add any kind of nonsensical ideas about gender roles and gendered expectations and things like that on top of it. So yeah, that's my belief. That's kind of how I understand these categories. And I want to clarify that this is not, I think people might say, oh, this is overly intellectual. But I want to say, for me, this is actually just the truth. Like this is how I experience these terms. Why do I think of myself as a male, but also as a man? And I do. I think of myself as a male, but also as a man. The answer is quite simply because I don't think of myself as just a mass of organic matter that is configured in a certain way that happens to conform to, two distinct binaries, one distinct binary, or two distinct categories of organisms centered around gamete production. That's not how I think of myself. I think of myself as a human being, a person who is in many ways built by the experiences of the material reality that affects me. And that is why I consider myself white. I consider myself British. I consider myself straight. And all of those categorizations reflect something more than just the pure material reality of what they describe. Every single one of them. And guess what? I consider myself a man. And I think in saying that, I'm saying a little bit more than I'm just biologically male. I'm just a mass of organic matter configured in a certain way to, achieve this certain, let's say, reproductive end, or to fulfill a certain kind of, well, I'm going to say fulfill a certain kind of role. Obviously, I mean in the context of men are physically stronger because of the jobs they do in a purely wild society. I mean, that's kind of the funny thing, actually. This is a weird thing to end on, but I just want to point out that biological reality generally does reflect certain strict social roles. Like, obviously, male deer have antlers because their social role is to fight each other for the affection of women. So that's kind of funny that, biological reality does reflect certain roles. But, the point being that it reflects those roles, not in a sense of kind of being conceptualized in a societal sense. And shit, I mean, that's probably kind of another point worth getting into, actually. The fact that, when we understand the aggression between two stags, we understand it in a biological sense. We understand it as they've evolved these big antlers, and they have these big antlers so they can fight each other, so that the kind of evolutionary natural selection computer can sort through and pick for the best stags. So the stag that is the strongest, the stag that is the most effective with his antlers, he'll be the one who gets a go on the evolutionary carousel. I don't know what term I'm looking for there. But we understand a very biological sense and a kind of very removed sense. Whereas obviously, when we're talking about gender roles in our society, we're understanding that we're talking about something which has evolved beyond, ironically, kind of evolved beyond evolution. The reason why, I don't know, two men might play pool against each other in a bar, in order to, I don't know, impress some onlooking women. I'm not sure. I don't know how courting works. The reason why they might do that is, in some sense, an evolutionary byproduct of male competition to win the affections of females. But obviously, we have to understand that we are sociological animals. We are animals who have invented so much in terms of, and kind of reinvented ourselves through the lens of society. So I think that's why it's so useful to have these different categorizations for the pure biological reality versus sociological reality. And, because we can talk about male biological roles. There are clearly, there are male roles to me. I am taller than, let's say, my sister. I am physically stronger than her. If my family, let's say, were out there, were cavemen in the African savannah or whatever, in 3 million BC. It's weird to say BC when you're talking about like 3 million years ago. But obviously our roles would be different, and they'd be different not because of kind of society, not because of these social constructs. They'd be different because of our biology. They'd be different because, well, let's be honest, who's going to go out there and chase down the elephant? This guy. Again, because of just physically, we are built for certain things differently. But that's what I kind of mean when I say, well, actually, when the reason to understand the distinction between the purely biological and the sociological is because we need to understand, again, I'll say this again, we have reinvented ourselves through the lens of society. And in that same sense, I would say that the idea of having a male body has been reinvented through the lens of society, and that reinvention, I think, is what I call man. So yeah, I think that's it. I'm gonna kind of edit this down, see how it ends up. I hope that you found this interesting. I hope this clarified some things. I think I get that this whole stuff is just so confusing. I want to stress, to me, even as it's something which is confusing, it is something which I genuinely believe. It is something which, I genuinely feel that, for me, my being male and my being man are two different things. And they are related. And obviously they're related. I mean, I make so many videos on this channel specifically about the fact that they are related. That my being a male and my being a man are very related. But, yeah, I don't believe they're identical. So I hope that this has clarified some things a bit more. I hope it's maybe made things a bit clearer for people. And I will just say, I'm really happy with the responses on the other video. I think there are some things which I think were misunderstanding what I was saying, which I kind of take responsibility for myself, and that's why I made this clarification. But even first of all, I don't think there is a single dislike. I thought there'd be at least one. I thought there'd at least be one person who would kind of be annoyed that I was kind of disagreeing with the kind of standard orthodox definitions, and they would dislike. Thus far, there are, I think, 75 likes and 0 dislikes, which is, I think that just reflects so well on kind of, I mean, I'd like to say my community. It's not really about the fact it's my community. I think it's about the fact that this is a commonality in the gender critical spaces in general. That they, you guys, and I guess I include myself in this thing, so I think I am kind of part of it, are so open to diversity of thought. And I mean, maybe you can make a criticism that actually it perhaps makes the label of gender critical a bit redundant, seeing as it's so open to diversity of thought that, there's all sorts of different ideas, and the only thing that really connects us is this rejection of, gender identity extremism. But nonetheless, I'm very happy with you guys and my community. To be honest, I was even expecting my money on Patreon to go down, just one person or maybe even 2 people would be like, I don't really agree with what he's saying here, and I don't know if I want to kind of support him if he's going to be saying these ideas. And honestly, that would be fair. Like if you felt like some of what I was saying was distinct enough from your kind of views that you thought you didn't really want to necessarily support me financially saying it, I would be fine with that. But no, honestly, no, I've still got all the patrons I had. So that's really good. Thank you. So I guess I'll just say thank you to my current patrons. Quick re-recording to account for new patrons since I actually recorded this video. Hannah, Kirsten, Stephen, Nancy, Rubble, Lizzie, Jessica, Constant, Adriana, Harper, Alex, Liger, Jane, George, Katie, Ryan, Vishnuvius, That Feminist, Lily, Emily, Frederico, A, Evan, Philip, Anna, Sophie, Jamie, Lena, Julie, Dustin, Rashmi, Marion, BJ, Joshua, Marina, Sam, Sarah, Valerie, Kathleen, Jelena, Dork, Alexandra, Emma, Owen, Sarah, Ibishka, Chris, Tina, Clara, Amy. You're all very appreciated.